Revenge rarely comes dressed in a tailored suit smelling of cedar and cordite. Usually it's just you, a glass of cheap wine, and the crushing weight of a text message you shouldn't have read. But tonight was different. Tonight, the man who shredded her life decided to parade his shiny new mistake right up to her table. He wanted a reaction. He wanted to break her a second time. What he got instead was the most dangerous man in the city, wrapping an arm around her waist, claiming her with a kiss that made the entire room stop breathing. Harper stared into a champagne glass. The bubbles rose in a frantic, pointless rush to the surface, only to pop into nothingness. She related to them a little too much tonight. The ballroom of the Grand Hotel hummed with the low, expensive murmur of the city's elite. Crystal chandeliers threw fractured light across the room, illuminating silk dresses and razor-sharp tuxedos. Harper adjusted the strap of her dark green velvet gown. She didn't belong here. She was a senior architect for the firm that designed the hotel's new West Wing, invited strictly as a courtesy. She was supposed to show her face, shake a few hands, and slip out the side door before midnight. She took a sip. It tasted like cold metal and bruised grapes. "Harper, God, it is you." The voice hit her spine like a hammer. It was a voice she had spent 5 years waking up to. A voice she had trusted to plan a future, right up until the afternoon she walked into their shared apartment and found that future tangled in the bedsheets with a 23-year-old marketing assistant. Harper didn't flinch. She took one more deliberate second to swallow her champagne, letting the cold liquid brace her throat before she turned. Trent stood there. He looked exactly the same. The same perfectly styled blonde hair, the same easy, arrogant slant to his mouth, the same bespoke navy suit he bought with his first major promotion. He looked successful. He looked happy. It made Harper want to break a glass against the polished marble floor. "Trent," she said. Her voice was steady, completely devoid of inflection. He didn't just come alone. Clinging to his arm like a decorative vine was Chloe, the marketing assistant, the home wrecker, now apparently the wife. Chloe wore a champagne-colored silk dress that dipped dangerously low her lips, painted a glossy, triumphant red. She looked at Harper with large, feigned, sympathetic eyes, the kind of look a victor gives the vanquished. "I didn't think this was your scene." "Harp," Trent said, sliding his free hand into his pocket. He leaned back on his heels, taking up space. It was a classic Trent move. Establish dominance. "Didn't know you could afford a ticket to the gala. It's a work function," Harper replied evenly. She kept her eyes locked on his, refusing to look at Chloe, refusing to look at the massive, gaudy diamond resting on the girl's left hand. "Right, the architecture gig." Trent chuckled a low, patronizing sound. "Still drawing up staircases. Then I told you years ago you should have moved into project management. There's no real money in the trenches." Harper's jaw tightened. She gripped the stem of her glass. She had spent the last year rebuilding her life from the studs. She moved into a cramped studio. She worked 80-hour weeks to get the promotion she deserved. She cried in the shower where the sound wouldn't bother the neighbors. She had survived him. But looking at his smug, unbothered face, all the progress she had made felt like a cheap veneer. "I'm doing fine, Trent." Chloe shifted closer to him, pressing her chest against his arm. "Babe, isn't this the ex you told me about? The one who didn't want to travel?" She looked at Harper, tilting her head. "Trent and I just got back from Santorini. It was absolutely magical. You really should get out of the city more. It does wonders for your skin." Harper stared at her. The sheer audacity of it was staggering. They hadn't just bumped into her. Trent had seen her across the room. He had navigated through a sea of billionaires and socialites just to bring his new wife over and rub her face in the dirt. He needed to know he had won. He needed to see her bleed. My skin is fine, Chloe, Harper said, her tone dropping a fraction of a degree. And Santorini sounds lovely. I'm glad Trent finally found someone to fund his vacations. Trent's smile slipped. Just for a second. The muscles in his jaw ticked. During their relationship, Harper had paid the lion's share of the rent, while Trent found his footing in finance. Careful, Harper. Trent warned, his voice losing its breezy edge. Bitterness isn't a good look on you. I came over here to be civil, to show there's no hard feelings. There are no feelings at all, Trent. Harper started to turn away. Enjoy the party. Wait. Trent stepped into her path, blocking her exit. He wasn't done. His ego hadn't been sufficiently stroked. He needed her to look small before he could walk away, satisfied. Harper stopped. The air around them seemed to thin out. People were starting to glance over. Trent was raising his voice, playing to the invisible gallery. You know I used to feel guilty, Trent said, shaking his head with a theatrical sigh, about how things ended. But looking at you now standing in a corner by yourself, I realize it was inevitable. You were always so stagnant, Harper. You never wanted to elevate. Chloe and I were building an empire. You're just surviving. Harper's chest tightened. A heavy, familiar weight pressed down on her lungs. She wanted to scream. She wanted to slap him. But she was frozen in the headlights of his cruelty, trapped in a high society ballroom with nowhere to hide. She opened her mouth to reply, to find some shred of dignity to hurl back at him. She never got the chance. She's not surviving, Trent. She's simply waiting for the trash to take itself out. The voice was a low, resonant baritone that cut through the ambient noise of the ballroom like a serrated blade. Harper flinched. Trent spun around. Chloe gasped, taking a sudden step back. A man stepped out of the periphery, moving with the slow, predatory grace of something that belonged in the wild, not in a tuxedo. Dominic Russo didn't just walk into a room. He occupied it. He stood 6'3", broad-shouldered, draped in a pitch-black suit that cost more than Trent's car. He didn't wear a tie. His white shirt was unbuttoned at the collar, revealing a glimpse of ink creeping up his neck. His face was all hard angles and shadows, high cheekbones, a sharp jawline, and eyes the color of a bruised winter sky. He stopped next to Harper. The air around them instantly grew dense. Harper could smell him, crushed pine expensive leather, and something inherently dangerous. She knew who he was. Everyone in the city knew who Dominic Russo was. He owned the shipping yards. He owned half the real estate in the financial district. And according to the hushed, terrified whispers of the city's elite, he owned the politicians too. He was the head of the Russo family. The word Mafia was never spoken out loud around him, but it hung over his head like a dark, heavy crown. Harper had met him exactly once 3 weeks ago in a sterile boardroom. He was the primary investor for the hotel project. She had presented the blueprints. He had watched her with unblinking, terrifying focus. He hadn't said a word to her since. Until now, Dominic didn't look at Trent. He looked down at Harper. His expression softened by an imperceptible fraction, a calculated adjustment that made Harper's pulse kick against her ribs. I leave you alone for 3 minutes to get a drink, Isabella. Dominic said, his voice a dark, smooth current. And you're accosted by the hired help. Harper froze. Her mind raced. Isabella. He was playing a part. He was stepping between her and Trent's firing squad. She didn't know why, but survival instinct took over. She leaned slightly into his space. I was managing, Harper murmured, playing along. Dominic finally turned his head to look at Trent. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Dominic's eyes were dead, void of any warmth or humanity. It was the look of a man who measured people by how easily they could be broken. Trent swallowed hard. His arrogant posture collapsed like a poorly built house of cards. He recognized Dominic. Any man working in the city's financial sector knew exactly whose money flowed through their banks and whose bad side meant professional or literal death. "Mr. Russo," Trent stammered. The smooth, patronizing tone from a minute ago was completely gone. His voice actually squeaked. I didn't realize you were here tonight." "Obviously," Dominic said softly. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. "If you had, you wouldn't be standing in my airspace, breathing on my woman." Trent paled. The color drained from his face so fast he looked sick. Chloe, sensing the sudden shift in power but not entirely understanding it, frowned and tugged at Trent's sleeve. "Trent, who is this?" Chloe asked, her voice shrill. "Why is he talking to you like that?" Trent didn't answer her. He couldn't take his eyes off Dominic. "I apologize, Mr. Russo. Harper and I have a history. We were just catching up." "A history," Dominic repeated. The word sounded dirty in his mouth. He took a slow step forward, just one step, but it forced Trent to take a hurried step back, nearly tripping over Chloe's heels. A history implies something in the past. Yet here you are in the present, attempting to belittle a woman who is so vastly out of your league, it's genuinely embarrassing to witness. Harper stared at Dominic's profile. His jaw was set in granite. He wasn't raising his voice, but the sheer, crushing weight of his presence was tearing Trent apart. "It was a misunderstanding," Trent said, holding up his hands. His palms were sweating. "Just a joke, right, Harper?" He looked at her, his eyes pleading. The smug victor was gone, replaced by a terrified little boy, begging for a lifeline. Harper looked at him. She looked at the man who had broken her heart, drained her savings, and tried to humiliate her in public. She felt nothing but a cold, hollow pity. "I didn't hear a punchline, Trent," Harper said, quietly. Dominic's lips curved into a faint, terrifying smirk. He shifted his weight, sliding his hand to the small of Harper's back. His touch was firm, burning hot through the thin velvet of her dress. "Tell me, Trent." Dominic said, his tone conversational. "Where do you work? You look like a man who pushes paper for a living. Mid-level. Desperate for a corner office you'll never get." Trent swallowed loudly. I'm a senior portfolio manager at Crestwood Financial." Dominic nodded slowly. "Crestwood. Peter Harding runs Crestwood." Trent nodded frantically. Yes, Mr. Harding is the CEO. Peter is a friend of mine," Dominic said. He reached into his breast pocket and pulled out a sleek, matte black phone. He didn't unlock it. He just held it in his hand, turning it over slowly. "I own a 30% stake in Crestwood. I wonder what Peter would say if I called him right now and told him one of his mid-level managers was harassing my partner at a charity gala." Trent stopped breathing. His eyes widened in sheer panic. Chloe let go of his arm, finally realizing the immense danger they had walked into. "Mr. Russo, please," Trent begged. The word tore from his throat. "I swear to God, I meant no disrespect. I didn't know she was with you. If I had known, if you had known, you would have shown her the respect she deserves," Dominic interrupted. His voice dropped an octave, vibrating with a sudden lethal edge. "You only respect her because you fear me. That is the definition of a coward." Trent shrank. He actually made himself physically smaller. Dominic wasn't done. He was dissecting Trent's ego with surgical precision. "You walked over here to flaunt your cheap suit and your cheaper infidelity." Dominic continued, his eyes drifting dismissively over Chloe, making her flush dark red with shame. "You wanted to make her feel small so you could feel big. But look at you now, Trent, sweating, shaking, begging for your job in front of the woman you tried to humiliate." Dominic leaned in slightly. The ambient noise of the room faded entirely into the background. "You are nothing." Dominic whispered, the words hitting Trent like physical blows. "You are a temporary speck of dust in her life. Do you understand me? Trent nodded quickly, his chest heaving. Yes, I understand. Then get out of my sight. Before I decide taking your job isn't enough. Trent didn't say another word. He didn't look at Harper. He turned and practically sprinted toward the exit, dragging a bewildered, humiliated Chloe behind him. They disappeared into the crowd, leaving nothing behind but the faint scent of fear and cheap perfume. Harper stood, frozen, staring at the empty space where Trent had just been completely, thoroughly destroyed. Her heart was hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. The air rushed back into her lungs, sharp and cold. She had spent years imagining what it would feel like to finally put Trent in his place. She had practiced speeches in the mirror. She had imagined shouting matches. She never imagined this. The absolute, quiet devastation of his pride. She turned her head to look at Dominic. He was already looking down at her. The lethal, cold deadness in his eyes was gone, replaced by a dark, intense heat that made her breath catch. His hand was still resting on the small of her back. His thumb slowly stroked the velvet fabric of her dress. "Are you all right?" he asked. His voice was no longer a weapon. It was a low, rough rumble. Harper cleared her throat, trying to find her voice. "I didn't need you to do that." "I know," Dominic said evenly. "You were doing fine on your own. You didn't give him an inch." "Then why did you—" Dominic stepped closer. The scent of pine and leather wrapped around her. "Because I don't like watching rats circle a lioness. And because I despise men who use women as footstools for their own fragile egos." Harper searched his face. He was a ruthless man, a criminal, a man who destroyed lives before breakfast. Yet here he was, standing as her shield. "Thank you," she whispered. The cynical armor she had worn all evening finally cracked. A sudden, overwhelming wave of exhaustion washed over her. The adrenaline was fading, leaving her trembling. Dominic felt the tremor. His grip on her back tightened, steadying her. "He's going to look back," Dominic murmured, his eyes tracking the crowd toward the doors where Trent and Chloe had fled. "He's going to stop at the door, and he's going to look back to see if this was real. To see if he can salvage a shred of his pride by telling himself we were faking it." Harper stiffened. "What do we do?" Dominic looked down at her lips. The intensity in his gaze was a physical weight. "We make sure he knows he lost." Before Harper could process the words, Dominic moved. He didn't ask. He didn't hesitate. His large hand slid from her back, wrapping around the nape of her neck. His fingers tangled in the hair pinned at the base of her skull. He tilted her head back and brought his mouth down on hers. It wasn't a gentle kiss. It wasn't sweet or hesitant. It was a collision. Harper gasped against his mouth, her hands flying up to instinctively grip the lapels of his suit. He tasted like expensive bourbon and dark intent. The kiss was territorial, dominant, and breathtakingly arrogant. He kissed her like he owned the air she breathed, like he was claiming her right there in the middle of a crowded ballroom. For a split second, Harper's mind rebelled. She should push him away. This was a billionaire mob boss, a man entirely too dangerous to play games with. But then he angled his head, deepening the kiss, his tongue brushing her bottom lip, demanding entrance. A fierce, sudden heat flared in Harper's stomach, burning away the last remnants of Trent's ghost. She stopped thinking. She curled her fingers into his suit, pulling him closer, and kissed him back. She poured every ounce of her frustration, her pain, and her surviving fire into the kiss. She met his dominance with her own fierce resistance, matching his rhythm. Dominic groaned a low, guttural sound in the back of his throat. His free hand slid around her waist, pulling her flush against his hard body. He lifted her slightly off her feet, entirely lost in the act he had initiated. The ballroom disappeared. The music, the clinking glasses, the murmuring crowd. It all vanished. There was only the bruising heat of his mouth, the iron grip of his hands, and the desperate electric current passing between them. When Dominic finally broke the kiss, he didn't pull back far. He kept his forehead resting against hers. Both of them were breathing heavily. Harper opened her eyes. Dominic's chest was rising and falling against hers. His dark eyes were blown wide, the pupils dilated, stripping away the calm, collected Mafia boss and revealing the dangerous, hungry man underneath. He saw Dominic whispered, his voice rough as gravel. Harper looked past Dominic's shoulder. By the grand exit doors, standing entirely still, was Trent. He was staring at them. His face was a mask of absolute defeat. He looked small, pitiful. He turned and walked out the door. His shoulders slumped, carrying the heavy, humiliating weight of a crushed ego. Harper looked back at Dominic. The fake relationship act was over. Trent was gone, but Dominic's hand was still tangled in her hair. His arm was still banded around her waist. "He's gone," Harper whispered, though she made no move to step back. Dominic's eyes flicked down to her swollen lips, then back up to her eyes. The mask of the savior was melting away, leaving something far more complicated in its wake. "I know," Dominic said softly. He slowly uncurled his fingers from her hair, but his hand trailed down the side of her neck, his thumb tracing her pulse point. "But now we have a different problem, Harper." Harper swallowed. Her heart was beating frantically against his palm. "What problem?" Dominic stepped back, finally giving her space to breathe, but his eyes never left hers. They held a promise that terrified and thrilled her in equal measure. "The problem," Dominic said, adjusting his cuffs with terrifying calm, "is that I don't want to pretend anymore." Harper's alarm clock went off at 5:30 a.m. She didn't need it. She had been staring at the ceiling of her cramped studio apartment since 3, listening to the radiator clank and hiss. Her lips still felt bruised. She got up, wrapped a faded grey robe around her shoulders and padded into the tiny kitchen. The linoleum was freezing against her bare feet. She scooped grounds into the coffee maker, her movements automatic, driven by muscle memory rather than conscious thought. Dominic Russo had kissed her. He had claimed her in front of 300 people, humiliated her ex-fiancé, and then casually dismantled the boundary between fake and real. "I don't want to pretend anymore." The words had echoed in her head all night, a relentless loop playing over and over. Harper leaned against the counter, watching the coffee drip into the carafe. She was a logical person. She built things. She understood load-bearing walls, tensile strength, and structural integrity. You didn't build a house on a foundation of nitroglycerin. Dominic was exactly that. He was a man who operated outside the law, outside of basic societal rules. Getting involved with him wasn't just risky, it was career suicide. It was literal danger. She poured a mug of black coffee, skipping the sugar. She needed the bitterness to wake her up. By 8 o'clock, she was sitting at her desk at the firm. The drafting table was covered in vellum paper and digital tablet screens, a chaotic mess of the Grand Hotel's West Wing redesign. It was her sanctuary. Here the lines made sense. The math never lied. "Harper," she looked up. Her boss, a balding, high-strung man named Gregory, was standing in her doorway. He looked like he hadn't slept either. He was holding a sleek, black leather portfolio. He gripped it like it was a live bomb. "Good morning, Gregory," Harper said, setting her stylus down. Gregory walked in and set the portfolio on her desk. He didn't sit. He shifted his weight from foot to foot. "A courier dropped this off 10 minutes ago. It went straight to the executive floor. Addressed to you." Harper frowned. "From who?" "From Russo Holdings." Gregory wiped a bead of sweat from his temple. He looked at Harper. Really looked at her with a strange mix of awe and sheer terror. "Harper, I didn't realize you and Mr. Russo were closely acquainted." Harper's stomach dropped. We aren't. We met during the initial pitch. Right, well, Gregory cleared his throat. Open it. Harper pulled the portfolio toward her. The leather was soft, expensive. She flipped it open. Inside was a single heavy stock document. It was a contract modification for the Grand Hotel project. She skimmed the legal jargon, her eyes jumping to the bolded sections. Her breath hitched. It was an executive mandate. Russo Holdings, the primary financial backer, was exercising a clause to restructure the architectural team. Gregory was being moved to an advisory role. Harper was named lead architect. The salary adjustment attached to the new title was staggering. It was more money than she had made in the last 3 years combined. Gregory, I didn't ask for this, Harper said, quickly looking up. I swear to you I didn't. It doesn't matter. Gregory interrupted, holding up a hand. His voice was defeated. When a man like Dominic Russo makes a suggestion, it's not a suggestion. It's a mandate. Congratulations, Harper. The project is yours. He turned and walked out of the office, closing the door quietly behind him. Harper stared at the contract. The paper felt heavy, radioactive. Trent had told her she was stagnant. He told her she was just surviving in the trenches. Dominic had heard that. And in less than 12 hours, Dominic had casually rewritten her reality to prove Trent wrong. It wasn't a gift. It was a brand. Harper grabbed her phone. She didn't have his number, but she didn't need it. She searched the firm's directory for the Russo Holdings liaison, found the main office line, and dialed. A receptionist answered on the first ring. Dominic Russo, please, Harper said. Her voice was surprisingly steady. I'm sorry, ma'am, Mr. Russo is unavailable. May I ask who is calling? Tell him it's Harper, she said, her fingers curling into a fist on the desk. Tell him the lead architect for the Grand Hotel project is declining his generous promotion, and if he wants to discuss it, he can come down here himself. She hung up before the receptionist could reply. Her heart hammered a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She was insane. You didn't hang up on the mob. You didn't issue ultimatums to men who could make people disappear. But she refused to be a pawn in his power play. She refused to let him buy her success. 20 minutes passed. Harper tried to focus on the blueprints, but the lines blurred together. Then the heavy oak door of her office opened. No knock. Dominic stepped inside. He was wearing a charcoal suit today, the tailoring so precise it looked weaponized. He closed the door behind him and locked it with a sharp, definitive click. The sound echoed in the quiet office. He didn't look angry. He looked amused. You have a terrible habit of rejecting things that are good for you, Dominic said, walking slowly toward her desk. Harper stood up. She needed the height, even though he still towered over her. I don't accept charity, Dominic, and I certainly don't accept blood money. Dominic stopped at the edge of her drafting table. He looked down at the scattered blueprints, his eyes tracking the intricate lines of her designs. He rested his large, ringed hands on the edge of the table. Charity, he repeated, rolling the word around in his mouth. You think I handed you a $50 million project out of charity? You did it to prove a point to Trent. Dominic's jaw tightened. The amusement vanished from his face, replaced by a cold, sudden intensity. He leaned across the table, invading her space. Do not insult my intelligence. Harper, he said, his voice dropping to a lethal murmur. And do not ever think I make business decisions based on a pathetic, insignificant worm like your ex-fiancé. Trent is a ghost. I stopped thinking about him the second he walked out of that ballroom. Harper held her ground, though her pulse was racing. Then why I've been a senior architect for 2 years? Gregory is the lead. Gregory is a coward, Dominic countered smoothly. He cuts corners. He approves substandard materials to save pennies on the dollar, compromising the structural integrity of a building that will bear my name. I read your internal memos, Harper. I saw the emails where you fought him on the load-bearing requirements for the West Atrium. You were right. He ignored you. Harper blinked. She had sent those emails 3 months ago. They were buried deep in the firm's internal servers. You hacked my firm's servers. I conducted due diligence, Dominic corrected, without a shred of guilt. You are brilliant. You are ruthless when it comes to your work. You care about the foundation. I don't give handouts, Isabella. I put the most competent person in charge of my investments. The fact that it pisses off your ex is simply a delightful bonus. Harper stared at him. The cynical defense mechanism she had built up over the last year stuttered. He hadn't bought her the job. He had investigated her. He had seen her competence when everyone else had ignored it. You still should have asked me, Harper said, though the fire had gone out of her voice. Dominic walked around the table. Harper's breath caught as he closed the distance between them. He didn't touch her, but he stood close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his chest. If I had asked you, Dominic said softly, looking down into her eyes, you would have said no. You are too proud. You think accepting help makes you weak. It makes me indebted. To me. Dominic reached out his knuckles, grazing her cheekbone. The touch was agonizingly gentle, entirely at odds with the violence she knew he was capable of. You owe me nothing, Harper, but I am a man who gets what he wants. And last night, I realized exactly what that is. Harper swallowed hard. She couldn't look away from his dark, heavy gaze. I'm not a shiny new toy, Dominic. I don't belong in your world. My world is dark. Dominic agreed, his thumb tracing the line of her jaw. It is violent, and it is unforgiving. I am not a good man, but I am fiercely protective of what is mine. Step into my world, Harper, and I swear to you, no one will ever make you feel small again. He wasn't offering a romance. He was offering an empire. He was offering a partnership built on concrete and steel. Harper looked at the contract on her desk. She looked back at the dangerous, beautiful man standing in front of her. I run the project my way. Harper said, her voice a quiet challenge. No interference from your people. If I say a material is subpar, it gets replaced. A slow, predatory smile spread across Dominic's face. It was the smile of a man who had just won a war. Agreed, he murmured. He leaned down his lips, brushing the shell of her ear, sending a hard shiver down her spine. Now sign the damn contract, lead architect. We have an empire to build. 3 days later, the rain was coming down in sheets. Harper locked the door to her firm, pulling the collar of her trench coat up against the biting wind. The street was empty, the glow of the street lamps fracturing in the deep puddles on the asphalt. She was exhausted. The transition to lead architect had been brutal. Gregory was barely speaking to her. The contractors were testing her authority, and she had practically lived on black coffee and adrenaline. She turned down the alleyway that led to the parking garage. Harper! The voice came from the shadows near the dumpster. Harper jumped, her hand instantly going to the heavy brass keychain in her pocket. A figure detached itself from the gloom. It was Trent. Harper almost didn't recognize him. The bespoke navy suit was gone, replaced by a wrinkled raincoat. He was soaking wet, his blonde hair plastered to his forehead. He looked haggard. The arrogant, smug glow of a man who thought he owned the world had been entirely stripped away. Trent, Harper said, her tone sharp. She didn't back away, but she kept a safe distance. What are you doing here? It's 9 o'clock at night. I need your help, Trent said. His voice was hoarse. He took a step toward her, his hands raised in a pathetic gesture of surrender. Harper, please. You have to talk to him. Talk to who? Russo. Trent spat the name like it was poison, though his eyes darted around the alley defensively. He ruined me, Harper. It wasn't just the gala. The next morning, Crestwood fired me. They didn't even give me a reason. They just handed me a cardboard box and had security escort me out. Harper froze. Dominic had said he stopped thinking about Trent the second he walked away. He lied. He hadn't just humiliated Trent, he had systematically dismantled his livelihood. "I'm blacklisted," Trent continued, his voice cracking with rising panic. "Every firm in the city has rejected my calls. My credit lines have been frozen. Chloe—" He swallowed hard, looking down at his wet shoes. Chloe left. She packed a bag yesterday. Said she couldn't deal with the stress. Harper stared at the man who had broken her heart. She waited for the vindication. She waited for the triumphant rush of karma. It never came. Instead, she just felt a profound, heavy disgust. Trent hadn't loved Chloe. He had loved the ego boost she provided. And the second the money dried up, the facade crumbled. "I don't control Dominic," Harper said coldly. "And I don't care about your job, Trent. You made your choices. Now you're living with the consequences. This is your fault." Trent suddenly snapped his desperation, turning toxic. He lunged forward, grabbing her by the upper arm. His grip was painfully tight. "You paraded that monster around. You knew what he would do. You owe me." Before Trent could finish his sentence, the shadows behind him moved. It happened so fast, Harper barely registered it. A massive figure stepped out from behind a concrete pillar. A hand the size of a dinner plate clamped onto the back of Trent's neck. Trent yelped as he was violently yanked backward, his grip tearing away from Harper's arm. He hit the brick wall of the alley with a sickening thud. A man stood over him. He was built like a tank, wearing a black raincoat and a flat cap. His face was entirely devoid of expression. Harper recognized him vaguely. He was one of the men who often stood near the exit when Dominic was in the building. "Do not touch her," the man said. His voice was thick with a heavy European accent. Trent was gasping for air, sliding down the brick wall into the mud. He held his hands up over his face, terrified. "Leo, stop," Harper said, recognizing the name Gregory had mentioned days ago. Leo didn't hit Trent. He didn't need to. He simply looked down at the pathetic, trembling man in the dirt. "Mr. Russo was very clear. If you approach Miss Harper again, I am not to break your jaw. I am to break your hands. You are a paper pusher. Let us see how well you push paper when your fingers bend backward." Trent scrambled backward, kicking through the puddles like a terrified crab until he was out of the alley. He didn't look back. He ran down the street, disappearing into the heavy rain. Harper stood in the rain, breathing heavily. She looked at Leo. "You've been following me," Harper stated. "It wasn't a question. I have been ensuring your safety, ma'am," Leo corrected politely. "Take me to him." Leo nodded once. A sleek black town car pulled out from the lower level of the garage, its headlights cutting through the rain. 20 minutes later, Harper was standing in the foyer of Dominic's penthouse, overlooking the city. The sheer scale of the wealth was suffocating. Floor-to-ceiling windows showcased a sprawling view of the skyline. The interior was dark wood slate and minimalist perfection. Dominic was standing by a massive marble island in the kitchen, pouring a glass of amber liquid. He wore dark trousers and a black dress shirt with the sleeves rolled up, revealing heavily tattooed forearms. He looked up as she walked in. He took one look at her wet hair, her flushed face, and the dark, furious spark in her eyes. Leo called ahead. Dominic said, his voice calm. He slid a second glass across the marble. "Drink this. You're freezing." "You had me followed," Harper demanded, ignoring the glass. "I had you protected." Dominic took a sip of his drink, his eyes unyielding. "You destroyed his life. You got him fired. You froze his accounts." Harper stepped forward, the anger finally boiling over. "You told me you didn't care about him." "I don't," Dominic said flatly. "I care about you. He was a loose end. A man with a bruised ego is unpredictable. I removed the variables." "You don't get to control my life," Harper shouted, slamming her hand flat against the marble island. I am not one of your soldiers. I am not a problem for you to manage. Dominic set his glass down. The sharp clink of crystal against marble echoed in the vast room. He moved around the island with that terrifying, predatory grace. Harper stood her ground even as he backed her against the counter. He boxed her in, placing a hand on either side of her hips, trapping her against the cold marble. He leaned in his face, inches from hers. "You're right," Dominic said, his voice, a low, vibrating rumble that sent shockwaves through her chest. "You're not a soldier. You are the only thing in my life that isn't steeped in blood. And I will burn this entire city to the ground before I let a miserable piece of shit like Trent lay a hand on you again." He reached up his thumb, brushing over the spot on her arm where Trent had grabbed her. His touch was burning hot. "You hate that I protect you," Dominic whispered, his dark eyes dropping to her lips. "But tell me you want me to stop, Harper. Tell me to pull my men back. Tell me to let you walk out that door alone, and I will." Harper stared up at him. She felt the raw, terrifying honesty in his words. He was offering her the door. He was giving her the control she demanded. But as she looked into the dark, bruising depths of his eyes, the cynical, logical architect in her finally surrendered to the fire he had ignited in her blood. She didn't want to walk out the door. She wanted the storm. Harper reached up her hands, tangling in his collar, and pulled his mouth down to hers. Morning did not come with soft light or quiet murmurs. It arrived with the harsh, brilliant glare of the city sun cutting across Dominic's bedroom floor. Harper woke to the smell of espresso and the low murmur of a muted television. She lay still for a long moment, staring at the ceiling. The ceiling was exposed concrete, industrial and cold, contrasting wildly with the Egyptian cotton sheets tangled around her legs. Her muscles ached. A deep, heavy ache that grounded her in the reality of what had happened the night before. She hadn't just crossed a line. She had burned the bridge behind her. She sat up, pulling the sheet over her chest. The cold air of the penthouse hit her bare shoulders. Dominic was sitting in a leather armchair by the window. He was fully dressed in a crisp white shirt and dark trousers, a tablet balanced on his knee. He wasn't looking at the screen. He was looking at her. His eyes were dark, unreadable, entirely devoid of the violent heat from the night before. He looked like a man evaluating a long-term investment. "You're awake," he said. His voice was a low rumble in the quiet room. "I am." Harper pushed her hair back from her face. She didn't hide under the covers. She met his gaze evenly. "What time is it?" "Just past 6. Dominic set the tablet on a side table and stood. He walked over to the edge of the bed holding a small espresso cup. He offered it to her. "Black. No sugar. Just the way you make it in your office." Harper took the cup. Her fingers brushed his. His skin was warm. "You pay too much attention to my coffee habits. I pay attention to everything that matters." He didn't sit on the bed. He stood over her, casting a long shadow. "You have a site meeting at 8. Leo is waiting downstairs to drive you." Harper took a sip of the espresso. It was bitter, perfect, and scalding. "Dominic, about last night—" "I don't regret it," he interrupted smoothly. "And I don't apologize for it. Don't ask me to. I wasn't going to." Harper set the cup on the nightstand. She pulled the sheet tighter around her. "But I need to know the parameters. I build things for a living. I need to know the foundation we're standing on. Am I your architect, or am I your mistress?" Dominic's jaw tightened. The question hung in the air, sharp and unyielding. Most women in his world didn't demand definitions. They accepted the gifts, the protection, and the silent, terrifying terms of his affection. Harper was demanding a blueprint. He leaned down, bracing his hands on either side of her hips. He brought his face level with hers. "You are my partner." Dominic said the words carrying the weight of a blood oath. In the boardroom, you answer to no one but the steel and the concrete. In this house, you answer to me. And I answer to you. You are not a secret, Harper. You are the woman I chose. If you think I'm going to hide you in this penthouse, you severely underestimate my pride. Harper exhaled slowly. The knot of anxiety that had been sitting in her chest since she woke up finally dissolved. She reached out her hand, resting flat against his chest. She could feel the steady, powerful rhythm of his heart. "Okay," she whispered. "Okay," Dominic echoed. He kissed her forehead, a brief, anchoring pressure. "Now get dressed. You have a hotel to build." The next 6 months were a blur of concrete dust, late nights, and relentless progress. Harper became a ghost in her own apartment, spending most of her time either at the construction site, the firm, or Dominic's penthouse. She thrived in the chaos. The transition from senior architect to lead had been brutal, exactly as she expected. The foreman tested her. The contractors tried to cut corners. She fired 3 of them in the first month. She didn't use Dominic's name. She didn't threaten them with his shadow. She used the contract. She used the city codes. She stood in the mud in her steel-toed boots and pointed out the hairline fractures in the cheap drywall they tried to sneak past her. By month 3, the site ran like a military operation. They didn't fear her because she slept with the boss. They feared her because she knew the math better than they did. Dominic kept his distance during working hours. He visited the site occasionally, always surrounded by his men, always standing on the periphery. He watched her operate. He saw the way she commanded a room of 50 burly construction workers without raising her voice. He looked at her not with possession, but with profound, quiet respect. But outside the site, the boundaries blurred. He took her to dinners where men in $1,000 suits lowered their voices when he walked by. He introduced her simply as Harper. No title, no explanation. He didn't need one. The way his hand rested on the small of her back told the entire city everything they needed to know. She belonged to him, and for the first time in her life, Harper didn't feel stifled by a man's presence. Trent had always made her feel like she was taking up too much space. He had constantly chipped away at her ambitions to make his own feel larger. Dominic didn't chip away at her. He built a fortress around her, gave her the keys, and told her to rule. She was happy. It was a dangerous, sharp-edged kind of happiness, but it was real, until the 3rd week of November. The rain had been falling for 3 days straight, turning the construction site into a treacherous grid of mud and slick steel. Harper was in the site trailer, a cramped, unheated metal box filled with blueprints and stale coffee. She was reviewing the load-bearing calculations for the central atrium. The grand opening was only 2 months away. The pressure was immense. The door to the trailer slammed open. Harper looked up. It was Miller, the site foreman. He was soaked, his hard hat dripping water onto the blueprints. He looked frantic. "We have a problem," Miller said, breathing heavily. "City inspectors are here. They're shutting us down." Harper frowned, standing up quickly. "Shutting us down? For what we passed the Phase 3 structural inspection last Tuesday." "Not according to them." Miller wiped the rain from his face. "They have a revised report. Says the steel beams on the west wing don't meet tensile strength requirements. They're citing a severe risk of collapse. They're bringing police tape to lock the gates." Harper's blood ran cold. The west wing. The section she had fought Gregory over months ago. The section she had meticulously sourced and verified herself. "That's impossible," Harper said, grabbing her coat and hard hat. "I tested those beams myself. The mill certificates are flawless. Tell them that." Miller grunted, stepping aside to let her pass. Harper marched out into the freezing rain. The site was chaotic. Workers were shutting down the heavy machinery. A group of men in city windbreakers were standing near the main gate, unrolling yellow caution tape. Standing with them, looking incredibly out of place in a cheap trench coat and holding a waterproof folder, was Trent. Harper stopped dead in her tracks. The mud sucked at her boots. The rain lashed against her face. She stared through the grey downpour at the man she hadn't seen in 6 months. Trent looked terrible. His face was gaunt, his eyes rimmed with dark, bruised exhaustion. He looked like a man who had nothing left to lose. When he saw Harper walking toward him, a twisted, desperate smile broke across his face. Harper closed the distance, her jaw set. "What the hell is going on here?" Harper demanded, ignoring Trent entirely and addressing the lead inspector, a stout man named Davis. "Miss Harper Davis," said, holding up a laminated clipboard. He looked nervous. "We received an anonymous tip yesterday morning regarding forged mill certificates for the steel used in the West Wing. We ran an expedited review. The paperwork you submitted doesn't match the database from the foundry. I have a court order to halt construction pending a full investigation." Harper stared at the clipboard. An anonymous tip. She slowly turned her head to look at Trent. "You have got to be kidding me." "It's public safety, Harper," Trent said. His voice was thin, reeking of false concern. "I couldn't just sit by, not when I had proof you were cutting corners to meet Russo's impossible deadlines." Harper's mind worked with terrifying speed. Trent had worked at Crestwood Financial. Crestwood financed the foundry that supplied the steel. He didn't have a job anymore, but he still knew the system. He knew how to doctor a database. He knew how to forge a discrepancy. He couldn't attack Dominic directly. Leo would have broken his hands. So he attacked her work. He attacked her credibility. If this shut down the site for an investigation, it would delay the opening by months. It would cost Russo Holdings millions. It would ruin her reputation as an architect. "You forged the database entries," Harper said quietly. Her voice didn't shake. "That's a severe accusation, ma'am," Davis interrupted, stepping between them. "We have to follow protocol. Until we can run physical core samples on the erected steel, this site is closed." "Physical core samples take 3 weeks, Harper snapped. "You're acting on a tip from a disgruntled blacklisted ex-employee who has a personal vendetta against me. I'm a concerned citizen," Trent sneered. He took a step closer to Harper, his voice dropping so the inspector couldn't hear. "I told you I wasn't just a speck of dust, Harper. You think you can ruin my life and just walk away. Now Russo is going to see exactly how competent his little girlfriend really is. When this delays his project, he'll drop you just like I did." Harper looked at him. She didn't see a monster. She didn't see a threat. She just saw a deeply pathetic, broken man clinging to the last shred of his ego. "You really don't understand how my world works, do you?" Harper asked softly. Before Trent could answer, the roar of a heavy engine cut through the sound of the rain. A black SUV tore through the mud, skidding to a halt mere feet from the caution tape. The doors opened simultaneously. 4 men stepped out into the rain. Leo was the first. Dominic was the second. He didn't wear a raincoat. His dark suit absorbed the water instantly. His face was a mask of absolute, terrifying calm, the kind of calm that preceded a massacre. The inspectors froze. Davis took a subconscious step backward. Trent paled, the triumphant sneer vanishing from his face instantly. He shrank into his trench coat, suddenly remembering exactly who he was dealing with. Dominic walked straight to Harper. He ignored everyone else. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his voice low, cutting through the ambient noise of the storm. "I'm fine," Harper said. "They're trying to shut down the site." Dominic finally turned his head to look at Davis. He didn't say a word. He just stared at the man. Davis swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. "Mr. Russo, sir, we received credible information regarding compromised steel. We have a court order. Dominic reached out, taking the laminated clipboard from Davis's trembling hands. He didn't look at the paperwork. He dropped it into the thick mud at his feet. "You have forged documents provided by a man desperate to remain relevant," Dominic said. His tone was conversational, which made it infinitely more terrifying. He slowly turned his gaze to Trent. "I thought I told you to disappear." Trent opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He backed up, bumping into a stack of pallets. It's real. The database was altered yesterday at 4 p.m. from an IP address traced to a public library in Queens." Dominic interrupted. He didn't raise his voice. He stated facts like bullets. "I own the foundry, I own the database, and I own the library." Trent stopped breathing. Dominic looked back at Davis. "Inspector, you have two choices. You can pick up your yellow tape walk off my property and go back to your office. Or I can call the mayor, explain that your department is operating on fraudulent tips to extort a $50 million development, and have your pension revoked by dinner." Davis didn't hesitate. He didn't even look at the clipboard in the mud. He nodded frantically. "Understood, Mr. Russo. Apologies for the interruption. We'll clear the site." He signaled his men. Within 30 seconds, the inspectors were practically running toward their vehicles. They left Trent standing alone in the mud. Dominic slowly began to unbutton his suit jacket. He handed it to Leo without looking away from Trent. The rain soaked through his white shirt, clinging to the heavy muscle of his chest and the dark ink on his arms. "Harper," Dominic said, his voice dropping to a gravelly whisper. "Turn around." Harper knew what was about to happen. Trent had pushed the boundary too far. He hadn't just insulted Dominic. He had threatened the project, the money, and Harper's peace of mind. Dominic wasn't going to break Trent's hands. He was going to end him. Trent fell to his knees in the mud. He was sobbing now. "Harper, please. Harper, don't let him. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." Harper looked at the man crying in the dirt. She felt Dominic step past her. "Dominic, stop." The words rang out across the quiet, rainy site. Dominic froze. He was 3 feet from Trent. He slowly turned his head to look at Harper. The violent, hungry darkness in his eyes was fully exposed. He was a predator, interrupted mid-strike. "He tried to destroy your work." Dominic growled the restraint, costing him immense physical effort. "He doesn't get to walk away from that." "I know," Harper said. She stepped forward, placing herself between Dominic and Trent. "But he's not your problem. He's mine." Dominic stared at her. The rain plastered her hair to her cheeks. She looked small against the backdrop of the massive steel structure, but her spine was steel. She wasn't asking for permission. She was drawing a line. Dominic's jaw tightened. For a second, Harper thought he would ignore her. She thought the violence would win. But then slowly, the tension bled out of his shoulders. He took a half-step back, yielding the ground to her. Harper looked down at Trent. "You think this was about proving a point?" Harper asked softly. "You think you could ruin my reputation with a forged database entry?" Trent looked up, his face covered in mud and tears. "Harper, I didn't just submit mill certificates to the city." Trent Harper said, her voice clinical cold. "I contracted an independent metallurgic lab in Boston to run physical stress tests on samples from every single beam before they were ever erected. I have the physical notarized lab reports locked in a safe in my office. Your forgery was useless." Trent stared at her, uncomprehending. "I'm an architect," Harper continued, stepping closer. "I build things to last. I check the foundation. You are a lazy, desperate man who relies on cheap tricks." She pulled her phone from her pocket. She dialed a number, holding the phone to her ear. What are you doing?" Trent whispered. "I'm calling the police," Harper said flatly. "Corporate espionage, forgery of municipal documents, attempted fraud. I have the IP logs Dominic just mentioned, and I have the independent lab reports. You aren't going to get a beating in an alleyway, Trent. You're going to get a felony conviction. You're going to federal prison." Trent let out a strangled cry. He lunged forward, trying to grab her legs, trying to beg. Leo stepped in instantly, his massive boot coming down hard on Trent's shoulder, pinning him flat into the mud. Harper didn't flinch. She finished dialing the number. She waited for the dispatcher to answer. She gave them the address and requested officers for a felony arrest. She hung up and slid the phone back into her pocket. She looked at Trent one last time. There was no anger left. Only the cold, sterile satisfaction of a problem permanently solved. "You're a speck of dust, Trent," Harper said. "And now you're swept away." She turned around. Dominic was watching her. The violence in his eyes had entirely vanished. It was replaced by something far deeper, far more intense. It was absolute, unyielding worship. He didn't care about the money. He didn't care about the police. He just saw the woman who had stood in the mud and built her own empire. Dominic reached out, wrapping his large hand around the back of her neck. He pulled her against his soaked chest and kissed her hard right there in the freezing rain, while Trent lay in the mud and the sirens began to wail in the distance. 6 months later, the ballroom of the Grand Hotel hummed with the low, expensive murmur of the city's elite. Crystal chandeliers threw fractured light across the room, illuminating silk dresses and razor-sharp tuxedos. It was an exact mirror of the night her life had changed, yet everything was entirely different. Harper stood near the center of the room. She wasn't hiding in a corner with a glass of cheap wine. She was standing beneath the massive vaulted ceiling of the West Atrium, a ceiling she had designed, fought for, and built. She wore a backless, structured black gown that moved like liquid shadow. She held a glass of vintage champagne, the bubbles rising in a slow, elegant dance. People approached her differently now. They didn't see a mid-level employee. They saw the lead architect. They saw a woman who had delivered a $50 million project under budget and ahead of schedule. They saw power. A senator was just finishing a long-winded compliment about the acoustic design of the lobby when Harper felt the familiar heavy shift in the air behind her. The hairs on the back of her neck stood up. The scent of crushed pine and expensive leather cut through the expensive perfumes of the crowd. "Excuse me, Senator," Harper said smoothly, handing her glass to a passing waiter. "I need to find my partner." She turned around. Dominic was standing a few feet away. He wore a bespoke tuxedo, the cut severe, amplifying the broad, dangerous lines of his shoulders. He was watching her. He always watched her like she was the only moving object in a static room. She walked toward him, the crowd naturally parting to give them space. No one dared stand too close to Dominic Russo. "You're late," Harper said, stopping in front of him. "I had to finalize a real estate acquisition in the financial district," Dominic replied, his eyes dragging slowly down the length of her dress and back up to her face. "Though looking at you right now, I realize I should have let the building burn." Harper smiled a genuine warm expression that she reserved exclusively for him. "Flattery won't save you. You missed the ribbon cutting." "I don't care about ribbons," Dominic murmured. He reached out his hand, sliding familiarly onto the small of her back. The touch anchored her instantly. "I care about the foundation. You built a masterpiece, Isabella." "We built it," Harper corrected softly. Dominic shook his head slightly. "I just signed the checks. You laid the concrete." He pulled her closer, ignoring the dozens of eyes tracking their every move. The city still whispered about them. They called it a scandal, a dangerous liaison, a tragedy waiting to happen. Harper didn't care. Let them whisper. They didn't know the truth. They didn't know that the most dangerous man in the city woke up early to make her coffee. They didn't know that he sat in the dark and listened to her complain about tensile strength calculations. They didn't know that his violence was a shield, but his respect was a sanctuary. Trent's sentencing was today, Dominic said quietly, his thumb brushing against the bare skin of her back. Harper looked up at him. She hadn't kept track of the trial dates. And 4 years, Dominic said flatly. Federal minimum. He tried to offer a plea deal involving Crestwood's internal ledgers, but the prosecutor declined. Harper let the information settle. She felt nothing. No guilt, no triumph, just a quiet, satisfying closure. Trent was a footnote in a story that was no longer about him. Good, Harper said. Dominic tilted his head, studying her face. You really don't care, do you? I care about this, Harper said, gesturing to the massive, glittering ballroom around them. She reached up, resting her hand flat against his chest, right over his heart. I care about the things that are built to last. Dominic's eyes darkened. The ambient noise of the gala faded away. He leaned down, his lips brushing against hers, a promise of the night to come. Then let's go home, he whispered. We have an empire to run in the morning. Harper smiled against his mouth. Lead the way. They walked out of the ballroom together, leaving the whispers and the ghosts behind. They stepped out into the cool, sharp night air of the city, moving not as a shadow and a survivor, but as two unbreakable pillars standing on solid ground. If you felt the heat between Harper and Dominic, smash that like button. Right now, Harper didn't just survive her ex's betrayal. She built an empire and found a man who worships the ground she walks on. Share this story with anyone who needs a reminder that the best revenge is unbothered, massive success, and maybe a ruthless billionaire by your side. Did Harper make the right call handling Trent legally, instead of letting Dominic finish him? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe for more intense, satisfying drama.